Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Today I'm joined by Alison Curbishley and Steve Cram. They are, of course, athletes, but they also run a successful business and a charity. So I'm really looking forward to talking to them today about how they've made that transition from sport into business. Ali and Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining me today on the podcast. Obviously, you're both runners.
I used to be.
Well, do you not run anymore?
Oh man, well I'll let you go first on that.
No.
And at the minute, no. You've had dodgy knees your whole life.
Yeah. You've now inherited
I've inherited a bit of a meniscus problem, which I've been so busy all summer I haven't had a chance to put right yet, and I will. So I've run a little bit. So yeah, temporarily not running, but I will be back.
Yeah, and I don't really have any other excuse than knee problems that stopped me running quite early in my career, and I think I lost count, was it 10 or 11 knee ops. Found cycling, did an awful lot of it during COVID, have done none of it this year. I don't practice what I preach, and I should do more. But yeah, we're a bit, I use every excuse.
We're very active. You know, we travel a lot with me probably more than you, following athletics, commentating and the rest of it. And then we have an events company, and we travel around with that. And the events, we have quite a few events now, and we're both very hands-on. And I particularly events, I see it as my gym.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't,
Right.
because they always go when you get into your 40s, as I am now, into your 60s. You know, the one thing you don't do, people tend not to do. You know, and you can go for a bike ride, go for a walk, go for a run, whatever. But it's the kind of strength thing you realise.
Strength stuff.
But I do. You know, we've just had an event, and you know, I love lifting the barriers and lifting the yoga. So I think reasonably fit.
Yeah, but not
exactly
sprinting around
Yeah.
like you used to be. But I mean, do you think was running always in your blood? I mean, were you the first on your feet at the toddler group and winning the egg and spoon race?
My earliest memories are just constantly moving.
Yeah.
And I think, I grew up in Teesside back in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, and my school, primary school, obviously didn't have structured PE as such. But the one thing was sports day. Once you're in, I don't know what it would be now, year 6 now, or 4th year at primary school, the big kids were allowed to run around the field once, whereas we were only allowed to do, the little kind of sports day. And I remember just dreaming about being in that 4th year and being able to do that. So I think it was always just something that I just loved, and I loved the feeling of winning and being proud of crossing the line first and looking at the kind of what that gives your parents, and I sort of, all of my memories of holidays, which were always in the northeast, travelling down to kind of the North Yorkshire coast, Whitby, Bridlington, Scarborough. Family friends had caravans. I would always join in the kind of sports day. So yeah, running was till I joined the club at 11, and then that was it. And pretty much the same with you, wasn't it?
A bit different, really. I was football daft.
Right.
And my uncle was a professional footballer. Played for West Brom, and then he actually emigrated to Canada, which quite a few of the players did in like the late 60s, early 70s. So football was the big love. And again, like Al says, at primary school, all you're doing is a little short. Now, I'm not very good at sprinting. So I didn't think I was a runner. I didn't think I was very, because I wasn't.
The focus is always on sprinting.
It was always very short.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until you kind of got to senior school, and then the first PE lesson in September, October, you kick you out and you go and do cross country, right? And hang on, I'm a bit better at this. I came in first, and you do class runs, and then they go, well, you can run for the school, and you and ran against some other schools. And I wasn't winning, but I was high up. And like Al said, you kind of very quickly realise, actually, this is an individual thing. And you're either that sort of person, or the team thing is really, and you can do both. But it did two things. One is I started to get a better runner, but I was still playing football, still really want to play football. But I got very frustrated with teammates. This is a 12, 13-year-old, because I could obviously had an engine, would keep running all the time. And in a football match, some lads would get a bit tired on it, and I'd be going, and I realised that if I could control it myself, even at that age, that was better. So whether I came, first, second, third, fourth, didn't matter. Well, that was on me. Whereas if we lost a match because the full back didn't track back, and he could have done. And do you know what I mean? I couldn't handle that as easily. A little bit different to you though, because my mother was German. My dad was a policeman. I usually say that's why I ran fast, because you're growing up in Jarratt, and your mother's German, your dad's a policeman. So I went on holiday every year from when I was 2, 3 to Germany for 3-4 weeks of every summer. And I think that also gave me, even from a very early age, because the Northeast in the 60s and the 70s was a tough place actually. There was a lot of people without jobs. There was, the mines were kind of, my grandfather was a miner. My family's from Hetton Hall. Shipbuilding was dying. The whole thing was a bit, and every 4 weeks I'd go to Germany. Every summer I'd go to Germany, and my family were in a very different, not in a city. It was quite quiet, and I used to do a bit of running there as well when I was in the summer and stuff. So I nearly ran for Germany.
Wow.
Nearly.
Your mum would have loved that, wouldn't she?
But what happened was, as I got a bit older and got better and was doing well nationally, and and obviously, but again, when I went on holiday, because that's the racing season, the summer, and I'd race in Germany as well, just, so you're not going to stop in July, August for 3-4 weeks. So I was racing while I was on holiday, racing here, and I thought I was doing very well. I was winning national titles and things, but I wasn't getting invited. When you lived in the Northeast, and the British Amateur Athletics Board, as it was then, was based in London, you sort of had to punch through more. And I wasn't getting invited to things that other people were getting invited. And I thought, why? Yeah, and I'm sure it was just because I was in the Northeast.
Yeah.
So I went on holiday when I was 16. I'd broken the British 16-year-old record.
And you still weren't getting knocks on the door.
Yeah. And I went to a meeting when I was in the German Athletics Federation, came and spoke to my mum and dad, and said, right, obviously my mum was German, you can run, we can start filling in the forms and all that sort of stuff. And that was at the end of that summer. I came home, and it was pretty close. I nearly did it. And then I think that winter I got invited to my first British junior camp, and it sort of went on from there. So yeah, but it was
It's a sliding doors moment, that though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it could have been very, very, very different.
I mean, not similar, but my dad was born in Scotland. And again, like Steve said, growing up in the Northeast, particularly in the winter, the only indoor possible tracks that you had to use were Cosford, RAF Cosford, slightly down south for us, and Glasgow. And so we would spend a lot of time going up to Glasgow and doing winter events. And Scottish Athletics, somebody must have told them that my dad was born in Scotland. So I got approached when I was 14. And of course, when you're in athletics, the only event that you kind of home country separation is the Commonwealth Games. So I came back, talked to my PE teacher, because she was just like, I spoke to her before I spoke to my parents. I thought, what do you think? And I think for me, obviously my grandparents were still alive at the time. I still had a lot of family in Scotland, so it meant an awful lot to them. So I chose the option to run for Scotland.
Are you still the Scottish record holder?
Still the Scottish record holder.
Wow.
Never been broken.
Never been broken, 28 years.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I broke it, and it had been held by Lindsay McDonald, who was a child prodigy, wasn't she? You knew Lindsay. And she never really progressed. I still never met her to this day. I think she was 17 when she went to the Olympic Games.
She was one of, in the 80s, athletics was huge on TV and everywhere. And any youngster like me, Lindsay was a little bit after me, but she's like 16, 17, she came into, I went to the Commonwealth Games as a 17-year-old that next summer I was talking about. And so Lindsay so everyone thought she's going to go on and become a world star. And she sort of stopped at like 18,
She never
19,
did, and I've never ever found out why.
And
I never met her, but all the way through my career, everyone kept telling me about Lindsay McDonald's record. No one's got close to it. No one's got it, and to break that, it really made headlines. And it was interesting because my best friend at the time I was living with, her was a Scot. Her dad played for Rangers. He was a goalkeeper for Rangers. So she was like the darling of Scottish athletics. And everyone was like, Mel Neaf's going to get this record. And then I went and nicked it. And it was like this Anglo-Scot, how dare she, But I absolutely loved it. And I only ran and I got a silver medal at the Commonwealth Games for Scotland.
It's 400 metres.
400 metres,
At least you didn't have to work the language, though. Like,
well, I didn't.
Because my German connections meant that as I got more famous and well-known, the German television, they all knew. So I was always getting asked. So if I ran in a meeting in Europe or in the championships, I had to do, it was BBC or ITV or whatever, and then I had to go do an interview in German, testing my German. My German once I was about 18 was probably about as good. Since then, it's gradually fallen away.
If you don't use it, it starts to...
You don't use it, yeah. So
I still think you're fluent because I've only got, basic GCSE German. I can tell you to go straight down the road and turn left, Gainsey Gradhouse. Yeah, but no, when I speak to... Steve's still got relatives out there, and your uncle who his English has got better, hasn't it? But he's very, very German. So he'll look at me dead in the eye and speak complete fluent German, and I'll just be like looking at Steve, like, but you still conversational German.
But yeah, but it was just interesting because the world obviously was very different now because you just send that imagery, podcasting, Instagram, whatever it might be, whereas then your TV was the single biggest influence in terms of how people found out who you were, what you did. And it was massive. Literally every house around the world by this sort of early 80s was watching sport, in particular live sport. Because live sport is quite a new thing. It sounds stupid to say that because people are used to live football. There was no live football. Once a year, the FA Cup final, that was it. Match of the day on it was recorded.
Match of the day.
So the big athletics events were live. Mm-hmm. And so particularly once we had, I was following on from Cone, Brendan I'd kind of been part of that interest that grew in the 70s in it. So it was international. I travelled and you went around the world, and so having an alternative language, it made people go, oh, okay, you can do an interview in German. It was the stupidest thing I ever did. I should have just gone, no, I can't do it.
Your mum loved it though, but his mum was such a character, and she'd lived here way longer than she ever lived in Germany because she moved here when she was 24?
22, I think.
22. So she had this, and she never lost a German twang. So she had this Geordie German, didn't she? Yeah. And he was always Stephen. It was never Steve. Stephen.
Sunday name.
Oh, and she used to hate people calling him Crammy. Because in the television world, that's what everyone calls him. Everyone's, you're Crammy. And she used to say, Crammy. He's not Crammy. He's Stephen. I was like, okay. But she would have, could you imagine if you'd have had, she always jokes. She used to say it with a straight face. When I talked about could he have ever ran for Germany, and she said, I nearly called him Wolfgang. And I went, the thought of Wolfie coming round the corner.
Yeah, you would have been Wolfie.
I just suited a Wolfgang. Growing up in Jarrah, Wolfgang.
I think my dad stepped in and was like, I think it's funny, isn't it? The world is such a... it's always cosmopolitan in the sense that it's almost, when I used to first travel, everywhere was so different. I was quite lucky. As I said, I've been going to Germany, I've been going to Europe since I was so unique amongst my friends, and most people hadn't been at Middlesbrough. So it was different. But then you start going further afield, and everywhere was different. The Eastern Bloc, going to Russia, going to East Germany, going to Africa, going to Australia, America, and it was, whereas and there weren't those global brands. There was one or two, but you kind of everywhere was very different. Whereas now there's a sameness to some extent about a lot of that, which I sometimes miss that idea that you could get on a plane and go somewhere and walk out and go, wow, this is completely different. I don't know where to go to get a burger. I don't know where to,
or I can't get a burger.
Or a coffee, or whatever. And so, or actually be understood. So that was the thing about traveling around, that making the effort to speak a bit of German or whatever was always useful. But
travel's an amazing thing for all sorts of reasons, for opening your mind and seeing that. And it's exactly the same. I travelled in China 20 odd years ago, and there was no way. If you got lost, you got properly lost, because nobody spoke English. None of the road signs are in anything that you can understand unless you picture. But there's something special about that. There's something brilliant about arriving somewhere and having to completely reconstruct what you're used to in terms of how you live your daily life.
You don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy bloke, but there's something about the pre-internet era where you had to be resourceful, and we sometimes talk to athletes a lot about that now. I coach and we work with, and you're looking for the ones who've got that ability to when I say look after themselves, I mean that if you did drop them in the middle of nowhere, imagine getting on a plane and your bag hasn't arrived because your airlines in those days weren't as and you've arrived to race in Yugoslavia, as it used to be called. And your bag hasn't arrived, and you're in a strange country, they don't speak your language, they don't, the food is strange, you're only there for 48 hours or 72 hours, and you're going to, it's how do you cope with that? Can you cope with that? Because being a top level sports person, particularly in a sport like athletics, where the journey to get to a high level is actually the easiest bit. It's not easy, you've got to train hard and you've got to work hard, but where a lot of people then fall down is the step into that world where you're traveling, competing, it's not all in a nice closeted kind of controlled environment, which you've probably been used to most of your life up to that point. And that's why people sometimes wonder why we throw 17, 18-year-olds into that. It's to get them kind of resilient to what if, can you compete still when you've had no sleep, you haven't had the food that you used to, you, as I said, your clothes didn't arrive, XX, all of that, and it actually then kind of spills over into the rest of your life then. I think those sort of things, whereas now there is we do see lots of young people in our sport as well who,
protected.
They're and everything's on their phone or whatever.
It's kind of
and so they have, I have been in places recently and they have no concept of where they are. Because they haven't had to think about it. Somebody's, they've even getting on a plane, it's in boarding cars, and I walk on, it's like a bus, and they get off at the other end, and somebody picks them up, takes them to a hotel, and and they can get anything they want, and so it.
Just embracing boredom.
That's
I'm terrible for that now.
It's a good thing in some respects, you're taking away some of that stress and stuff. But what happens then is when the stress comes, they're not ready for it, and that's why we look for the ones, and it's that what is no different now to what was in our day is the ones who can produce that performance time and time again when things are going well, but also when things aren't going well. And that's what you look for. And the champions are still the champions. They would have been champions 20, 30 years ago as they are now. That
travel that you were saying as well, sport has given that massively, has given us both that. And that's what one of the things that I'm so grateful for from the age of 15, 16, being able to pack my bag and my parents, somebody paying for us to travel around the world and do something that you absolutely love, which was, initially a hobby and then eventually into being able to call it your job for, him longer than me, but then to be able to then retire from that sport and be able to then move into media and follow the sport and cover it with the best seat in the house and just talk about it.
I travel more now than I did when I was competing.
But you also...
Because you didn't, as a competitor, you didn't do all of the events.
You would pick and choose.
You would be picking and choosing, you'd have your programme, whereas now...
but it makes you appreciate, like this year, we got back from Paris and then you went straight off to do 3 Diamond Leagues on the bounce. And you were absolutely wrecked. And the athletes were following you around, and they'd just done the Olympic Games, the height of the Olympics.
I did have this conversation with one of them though, and he sort of said, we were having a laugh about it. And I was feeling a bit, I've got no right to be tired. And then I said, well, hang on a minute. I said, during the Olympics, we were commentating mornings and evenings, every day. You only ran 2 races.
But you also get that lull, and a lot of athletes have been talking about it much more now than they ever were, of that kind of post-Olympic depression, which I don't even think I had it as bad in 2012, but this time around, I loved Paris so much. I was just like, I just want to stay in this Olympic bubble where it's a wonderful world. Every day we're watching top level, amazing sport. And I couldn't consume enough of it, even if I wasn't talking about it, watching it in the athletic stadium. We went to all of the venues that we could get to. And Paris is just such a phenomenal city. And then you come back and it's just like the normal grind of day-to-day emails. And
what was your sort of one standout moment then from Paris, if you had to pick one?
Apart from that Thursday afternoon when I was cycling back along the canal and I lost my phone, it popped out of the electric bike I was on, slid across the floor and just dropped into a canal. And I remember just stood there and I was on my own.
Oh.
And I just was like, what can I do? Like, and then the stress was, how do I off-hire my electric bike because my phone's involved?
That goes back to what we were saying before, though. There's my life going.
Yeah. So no. Apart from that, I think there were so many standout moments in the stadium, but I think Keely Hodgkinson's night of winning, this amazing 22-year-old who's just had a whirlwind of the last 3 years, because obviously the Olympics were delayed with COVID, so 2021, and then and she's been the Neely girl in 3 years, two World Championships and an Olympic silver, and then went and did it this year. And that same night, Mondo Duplantis, who's just this amazing Swedish star in the pole vault, who just is doing what Sergei Bubka did in the pole vault, just moving the world record up 1 centimetre at a time. And that whole night was just bouncing, 80,000 people in Stade de France. And I think I loved it for the fact that my radio team with 5 Live is really small. It's not like telly. Telly do everything on a big scale. With radio, we had my producer, my commentator, Kath Merry, my producer's a woman, and Kelly Cates presenting. And you just had these 4 middle-aged women having just the best time. It was like being at an ABBA concert every night. We all got on so well. And I think it came across in the, because I've had so many people, when I've come back, working on our event at the weekend, had a couple of people come up and say, I really enjoyed the coverage that 5 Live did. And that's, because that's all you want. You want your enthusiasm to come down the microphone and come out the other end. Because I listen, I'm a big fan of 5 Live, love live sport on the radio. And when you're driving in the car, you just want to know that these people are just consumed by it.
Yeah, you feel the enthusiasm.
You have to shut up, three seconds to wrap up.
It's a more produced. Yeah. I think, that was a great night. So because I was,
you were on your bike, actually, when Mondo did his world record.
I'd left the stadium.
You'd already left the stadium. He was on his electric.
You're on such a, so in getting out, there's 80,000 people. And I was loving, Paris did a great job in so many respects. We sort of whisper it quietly. I think it was probably better than London and slightly different. Both were immense.
It kind of should be, though, 12 years on.
Apart from the ceremonies.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yes, the electric bike was a brilliant thing that they did, and so we could get backwards and forwards, because getting out afterwards, and you've got to come back early the next morning, and you're prepping, and Mondo is just this character, and I thought, he's not going to do it tonight. And I was just heading out. It's like when you leave and your team scores in the 98th minute or something, and you've gone. Not that I ever do that at football, by the way. I think I'll just give you a quick little, just what the Olympics are about. So earlier in the year, I was approached by an athlete who's changed her coaching setup, and is actually Australian, gone back to work with her dad, and so said, look, I need a bit of help, I think. Could you help? My dad's coaching me, but there's some gaps. Could you? And obviously I've known her for quite a few years on the circuit and things. And she's a great athlete, world-class athlete. Never looked as though she was going to ever be able to win a medal at a major championship. She's one of those who's going to get to the final is good, and then there's always 3, 4, 5, 6 better people. And I was chatting to her. When was that? March.
Off the back of the world
indoors.
And she was
like, and
she's
like, I said, okay, so what? She goes, I want to win a medal at the Olympics. Now, and the Olympics every 4 years just infuses people with this belief or this desire that has no right to be there sometimes. And I was you know, my face was kind of going, yeah, great. And my head's going, really? You know, and, you know, I've sat where she is and know that once you get that in your head, you cannot have anyone telling you, no, you can't do it. Right? So that's not my job to go, well, actually, why don't we look at, you know, so you okay, great. So then it was looking at what she was doing with her dad, and to cut the story short, you know, as the season went on, it became more and more evident that she absolutely had a chance and won a silver medal in the end, in the 1500. It was odd because it was Laura Muir, who's one of the British girls who I've known for so long, ended up 5th, but Georgia Bell won 3rd, so we won a bronze medal as well. But Great Britain. But to see a person, you know, an athlete who has decided for herself that she's going to set the target, and that those of us around have to buy into that and to help her to do that. And it's all her. You know, she did something. She broke a world record in Monaco, you know, in the 2,000 meters. She took herself to a new level. Yes, by hard work, and yes, with some input, and yes, with some... And I love that. You know, I love... And that was quite a short period, you know, for someone to transition that quickly.
And you were really lucky because you saw that from the inside as well. You were able to, you know, because an athlete, I think... I
kept going around telling people.
Yeah,
I didn't
keep an eye on it.
I kept going, watch Jess Hill, and people were, really? Well, I'm telling you. Because I knew what she was doing in training. And then she started to do these races and everyone's going, oh, hang on a minute, you know. She'd never been altitude training before, so she went to an altitude camp pre the games, and so it was all falling into place in a way. But you then still got to go and do it. So the Olympics does that to people. You know, it's the champions. Keely was expected to win, and she delivered. Mondo was expected. You know, the big stars deliver. That's the Olympics has to have that. But you also want the surprise, the stories. You know, the ones who's that? You know, where have they come from?
Unsung heroes that
and
pop out.
That's
we had like little Phoebe Gill. She was 17, and from the beginning of the track season, she started posting these times in tiny little meets around the UK, and everyone was like, "Who's this kid? This 17-year-old?" And I remember I was at a football match with Paula Radcliffe and her son, and we were chatting to an agent, one of our friends that was there. And Phoebe's name came up. So this would have been in kind of the end of May or beginning of May. And we were talking about what if Phoebe gets to the British Championships, Olympic trials, and gets in the top 2. She has to be automatically selected because she'd already got the time. Would she go? And I remember we were all having this debate and we were all going, well, of course she'll go. You know, why wouldn't you? Because you're in the same event that Keely Hodgkinson's in. You're going to watch Keely Hodgkinson from the inside because you're in the British team. So you're going to watch how somebody is going to go and try and win a gold medal. At the age of 17, there's no better template for you to be able to learn from. And that's exactly what she did. And Keely will have to be careful now because it's so difficult to
have somebody
because it's, like Steve said, it's not easy to get there.
We've done those journeys and it's lovely to watch. Not everybody does, not all talented 17-year-olds make it, you know. But it's great to see the Jess story, the Australian girl, and then slightly lower down Phoebe. You know, first she would have sat in February, March, not even thinking about the Olympics. Yeah, maybe going to the World Junior Championships, the World Under 20 Championships. That would have been the target, and her life has changed by her running a couple of seconds quicker than she expected. You know, and it just puts you on a different path, and come back to what I was saying earlier on, you look for those people, particularly young, who have just got those qualities. There's loads of talented people. You know, I grew up in Hebburn. Brendan Foster lived 400 metres down the road, or his parents did. That's where the house that he grew up in. Another lad called David Sharp lived about half a mile the other direction, who became a world junior champion. You cannot tell me in all of those other houses, just in Hebburn,
There's something about the coke works. That's what
no, my point is, running is a very natural thing to do. It's just that most people, I mean, lots of people do it now which is great. But the talent is everywhere. I promise you. You know, maybe not the pole vault, but Mondo's a good example. You know, Mondo's. I used to talk a lot about when I was young. People, and we'll say the same about Phoebe, I guess. People go, you're very lucky. You're super talented. So you get it in your head that you're somehow different. And the problem with that is that there becomes a sense of entitlement with that you think, oh, well, I'm going to make it because everyone tells me I'm so talented. And the truth of the matter is you have to work bloody hard. You have to work hard for anything in life, but in sport in particular. And it starts quite young. So if you said to most 12-year-olds, okay, for the next 10 years, all right, you're probably going to have to, it's the whole 10,000 hour principle. And where are those 10,000 hours coming from? Well, you're at school most of those days for most of those. So it's got to be in your time. So you're not going to go to the pub with your mates. You know, you're probably not going to go on some holidays with your mum and dad. You're going to have to get up early. You're going to have to, you know, and it's a journey that most people don't want to do.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of commitment.
And so the talent.
Yeah.
So then you start, as I got older, I realized, it ain't about it. So it's the nature-nurture thing. It ain't nature, it's nurture with nature's help. And the nurture thing, so coming back to Mondo Duplantis, his dad used to pole vault.
American, yeah.
So he puts him when he's 4, running down the runway. So Tiger Woods with a golf club, you know, from the age of 2 or 3. That's nurture. You have to have some of that. But I'm convinced genuinely that the ability, the talent, if you like, is ubiquitous almost. It's
how
what
you bring
do you
it
do
out.
with it? How do we get it out? How do we tease it out? How do we introduce kids to these environments where they've got a chance to... Have you done the pole vault?
No.
You don't know, do you? You could have been a great pole
I might
vault.
have been a great
But that's what I'm saying. If you've never had the chance,
Yeah.
and you can... Okay, pole vault's a bit niche, but there are lots of other things that kids now are just not getting the opportunity. Cross-country.
Well,
most schools don't even do it.
well, they use it as when you talk to anyone now, it's like a punishment, isn't it? And that's what I know.
It was for me, I can tell you.
Paula hates it, and she gets her back up, doesn't she? She's like, why was cross-country given as a punishment?
Yeah,
like, go and run. Whereas, you know, and so that becomes your memory
It does, indeed.
of, oh God, I hated it when I was at school. But it comes back to school. School is the, I guess, safe space where sport can be identified. And that's where we both get so frustrated in our traditional education system now. You know, that maths, English, physics, science, whatever. But actually, if you're not that good, and you were better than I was. I was all right. I was kind of top set to sort of second, middle. You know, I came out with all my GCSEs, came out with A-levels, went to do a degree. But if sport is what you love, and, you know, there isn't that option, you know, there isn't
the same focus. No,
exactly.
it's not.
And they don't value it.
It's seen as an add-on rather than
so whether it be arts,
core subject.
Arts, music, sport, you tend to find that those sort of students that excel in those maybe aren't also your top brass in maths, physics, whatever. So yeah, I do get really frustrated. And I also, when I've retired and I started doing a lot more school visits, sports days and whatever else, you take your medals in and you try and be that figure of, you know, I was just like you, I sound like you, I look like you, and try and sort of influence the next generation. And you go to sports days and they do like, you know, oh, it's non-competitive. You're like, what? You know, the first thing you do, you're going to put them in an exam. They're going to learn, you know, they're going to have to take an exam. They're going to be graded on an exam. You're putting them in math sets. Why on earth wouldn't you celebrate the kids that are quickest? But just, all right, there'll be a kid at the back, but also there'll be a kid in the math set 5. But that's how it is. That's life. You know, you'll go for a job interview, you might not get it.
Yeah, understanding
Guess what?
disappointment and failure is as much about life as successes. And both of you have had, had huge success, but you've also had big disappointments. I mean, you know, your career was cut short through injury, and there will be many a race that you have thought you were going to win,
the good ones,
and haven't. How do you bounce back from that? Just popping in to say, if you are enjoying the conversation so far and want to make sure you keep up to date with other episodes, then please hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Let's jump back into the conversation now. How do you bounce back from that? It
is hard, and I think you become, well, we talked about resilience earlier. And I think that's what sport teaches you, and that's where everything that I learned as an athlete, all of the skills, I kind of just are transferable into life. It's harder, I guess, now, and I'm trying to tap into those when we're running a business now, and not every day is a good day. And the challenges I think
it's there's 2-3 aspects to it for me. There's an honesty, first of all, and sport has that. You cannot lie. You came third. No, I didn't. I was second. No, you were third.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't pretend. So it's a very objective world that you're in. When you have that objectivity around, well, that was the result. That was the outcome. So then immediately, if you're that type of person, it's okay. That was disappointing. So how do I change the outcome? You know, how do I make that outcome different next time? And that's the beauty of it. Is it? And you can sometimes backtrack. You then have to backtrack that all the way. It can be that you got boxed on the top bend, and you go, well, that's, actually, I can put that right next time. I can, that's a bit. Or, the more difficult thing is you're not good enough, right? So, well, what can I do about that? Well, there's only certain things you can do about that. You can train harder, definitely get better, but there's going to be a Usain Bolt. There's going to be. So that's then about am I setting the right targets? It's not about being realistic. Come back to Jess Hull's thing.
I was going to say, Jess.
It's about saying, what is the environment I'm in? What is it? So how do I get the best out of myself, and use those people to pull me up to that level? And sport, if you're smart around how you do it, it isn't always I've got to beat Usain Bolt. He might be the best sprinter the world has ever seen, and that's okay. And if you're running against him at the time, and I know people running against me used to just go, oh no, I'm going to come second or third. But sometimes that's okay, because that's as long as you are doing everything within your ability to be better, to be the best you can be. What happens to everyone else? Because I might trip up, But if you're languishing in the back, oh, Crammy's going to win, whatever. If I trip up or something, and then you go, oh, and someone else wins, they go, oh, I could, So you get what I mean. So what you do is that disappointment is there. You can't ignore it. It's what, it's the emotions that we have as human beings is what makes us go on and do things. But you don't dwell on that. And I think that Al's right. We've learned to do that. I learned to commentate. I used to broadcast. I used to run circles around a track. And people go, oh, well, that's, well, no, actually, the subject matter I know about, but I don't know anything about broadcasting. I commentate on curling. I knew nothing about curling.
It's great curling.
Well, of course it is. But my point is that once you learn, something I'd like to do or something I'd like to have, am I prepared to do what's required to make that happen?
Yeah.
Understand what that is. Do I need any help? Can I get any help? Where can I get better? And you go through those processes, and most of them are time. Not always, but athletics, sadly, you couldn't go, I've got a dentist appointment that day when the Olympic final is, that was it. And if you got injured 4 days before, tough. And those are the toughest things to take.
I think it's stuff that you're not in
gather
control
up
of.
again, and you go again. I mean, I coach a Kenyan woman who won the Great North Run this year, Mary. But Mary was training for the Chicago Marathon, which is this Sunday. And after the Great North Run, which was our last she had one more week of harder training, then it was going to taper down, and she's picked up an injury. That's 6 months of hard training.
Yeah, you're only doing 2 marathons
You only
a year.
do 2 marathons a year. And winning the Great North Run was brilliant. She loved it, and it was a big thing. And so there's a little bit of a silver lining on a dark cloud. But she's 35. And she's, I've been working with her for 3-4 years, and we both wish we could have started a bit earlier, because she's had a great period of racing and doing very well on a world level. But she's not kind of go, oh, poor me. She's already, so we're going to talk to her about, it's the rehab. She's in a boot at the moment. How many weeks is that? And all she's thinking is, right, how long's the boot on? When can I start running again? What's the rehab program? And that's what people do.
And it's only when that energy subsides that you go, right, it's time to hang up. Which is it. I got to the point where I was
when
like,
to quit.
I cannot get
When you don't wake up
onto a physio bed anymore.
When you don't wake up going, right, what do I?
Yeah.
And it's not about being the best anymore, as I said, because most people have a career where it goes up. If you're lucky, you stay at the top for a while, and then there's going to be a down. And it's where on that down you decide that's enough. And you're in your 30s normally, you're not old. It sounds really young to me now, but yeah. So you can, if you are still striving, so remember when you were 17, I had to do this when I was 31, 32 and go, okay, when I was 18, I was trying to come fourth rather than fifth. And it meant a lot to me. Can I beat him? I know I'm not going to beat them yet, but and then you're taking those steps all the way. And on the way down, what you're trying to do is to make those steps really small, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so you're not plummeting
so you're
down,
not,
yeah.
Because once you start to, but if you're still fighting to come second rather than third, and you're still annoyed that you could have come third, not fourth, you're not winning anymore. But as soon as that goes, that's time to stop.
It's time to move on. Yeah. And that's what you've done. So you've transitioned from running to running a business, commentating, doing all sorts of things. What's that transition been like for you two?
Probably the business side of it we kind of fell into because we've been together 20 odd years now, 21 years, and we were both. I was just finishing my career then. Steve was already working at the BBC. I fell into the radio by knowing the producer of 5 Live really well. He used to interview me when I came off the track, and I did that usual athlete transfer. We'll get an athlete who's injured into the comm box. They can give us a bit of a perspective. And I just absolutely loved it. And then retired officially, I guess, 2003. And that was my first World Champs. And then from then on, kind of grew roots. I remember somebody had given me advice saying, become somebody that the commentator cannot not have by their side. Make sure that role is you. You fit that role, nobody else. Because you've got a job till the next athlete retires.
You might not think it, and you're right. How do you make the transition? Well, you do the things you've done before, because it's still quite competitive. You come into a world that's very different, and the parameters are completely different. No one's yet actually told me at the BBC I'm doing a good job.
That's what you struggle with.
I've been there about 28.
Longer. 20, yeah.
27 years? Whatever. So Brent said that to me. He said, don't expect anyone to come and he says, if you're still getting a contract, you're doing a good job. I go, okay, great. So how do you measure yourself in a world which is very subjective? I mean, if you've done this, and we all have, you're sat at home watching the telly, and it could be a newsreader, sitting telling you the evening's news, and you're going, can't believe he's wearing that tie. Do you think that tie goes with that shirt? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And you kind of, so it's a really weird world. So you're kind of, where's the success? How's it? And particularly if you're doing it time and time and time again. So how do I get better? How do I improve? Which is me. So when I first started it, I struggled really with, both of us did it because it keeps you back. When you quit a sport, you do 2 things. You either walk away from it and probably actually become a bit cynical about it, or you want to keep involved.
Find a different way to engage with it. Yeah.
And that's what we both chose. And
we both love athletics, though. We can sit and talk athletics. You
kind of have but then you've got to find a way to measure yourself in a completely different way. I found that really hard. I found it hard to, Daley Thompson once said to me, don't quit. I won't say what the word he said, but it's not nice. And I went, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's that thing. He says, since, certainly for me and for him, since you're 14, 15, you get up every morning knowing what you're trying to do, knowing where you're going, knowing and that might be the Olympics are 4 years away. I've got the World Championships, or it might be, and then I've got to be, and it's the middle of the winter, and I've got to be doing 80 miles a week, and I've got to be, if I'm going to do 80 miles a week, I've got to get off my backside and go for a run this morning. What you're doing today ties into it. Whereas you take all that away, and you're kind of going, okay, I'm Steve Cram, But as I said, I couldn't find any jobs that said running laps around a track. It was like, what do you do?
That's a really big point, though.
What do you do?
Our sport have tried to, with lottery funding, have tried to step in and help athletes go through that, because so many of them go through major crises.
It's a bit like coming out of the forces, isn't it?
Exactly.
When you've only known one particular way of working, you become institutionalised into that way of working.
I was lucky, of course I was, because the more successful you are, there's more doors are open to you. The 2 things I was, an Australian guy who I happened to know around that time, give me the best bit of advice. Because I said, I don't really know what I want to do. And he said, okay, that's not a problem. He says, why don't you start with what you don't want to do? And it was a really good piece of advice, because I started turning down things.
Yeah.
Because there's a tendency to think, yeah, okay, I'll
take that.
And actually, I took a little bit of time to understand what I didn't want to do. And actually, one of the things that fell into that was kind of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I didn't understand that world. I'd never had that world. And I was scared of it, probably, of that routine. My life had been, you know, measured in Olympiads and you know, a year and chunks of the season, and you know, Saturday and Sunday and Monday and Tuesday were training days.
Didn't matter.
It didn't matter, you know, and there was no. So I was like, so I was offered a couple of things quite early on, which I turned down on that basis. So the transition is hard, and not everybody makes it very easily. And the lower down, you know, if you've been very successful, it's easier. If you've been very good, but perhaps not a household name and not so, that's tough, really tough. I think even for women, it's maybe even harder. There is that for women, there's particularly when they get into their late 20s and early 30s, there's this sense that they've got to catch up, like, you know, married, have kids, and do you know what I mean? And I think there's a sense of, oh, I'm 5 years behind my friends because they're all married and got kids now and whatever. And so I think it's much harder for women in professional sport, be it, and of course there's a lot more professional women's sport now than there was 20 years ago in football and rugby and cricket, and so, which is brilliant. But we're at the beginning of that process, really. There's going to be a lot of, and you only have to look at, going back to the 80s and the 90s, what happened to a lot of footballers who, in that period where it became quite big. If you go back, kind of social stuff, you go back to footballers who were big in the 60s and the 70s, they sort of went off and got jobs afterwards. They had a professional career, but they didn't change their lives. Buy a pub might be the best, but they went on and then would have. Then you have the era where footballers start to get paid a lot more money in the 80s and the 90s, but again, the career comes to an end, and it might not have earned enough to completely just be able to sit on the beach for the rest of their lives. And for them, how many stories you've read about gambling, drinking, you know, it's really hard to, people know who they are, but they're 35 and they can't do what they used to do. So what do you do? So there's and I think it'd be really interesting as Al said, there's a lot more support now, and I think in particularly for women in professional sport, it's going to be a big thing, because we've had this new big explosion of but in 10 years' time, some of them are coming to the end of that.
And how do you?
So I think,
what happens to them, and how do they
there's
get
been
the
a lot
support
of
they need?
I don't know in the business world or anywhere else really where you'd have a really intense, immersive career that stops.
Yeah.
And you cannot do that anymore.
Do you think people in business where it's become their lives and their lives work, no matter what age they are, when that comes to an end, you see it with founders of businesses all the time, find it really difficult to withdraw from it and find the time when it's right to go, and then have a real identity crisis when they do, because they don't have a focus and a purpose anymore. So it's like that, but on excuse the pun, on speed, at an earlier age.
And I think there's been so many pioneers, particularly female pioneers over the last decade, in particular, where they've been challenging the brands, because in our sport, you know, they don't make, yes, the high end is a very thin sliver that will make an awful lot of money, but then that gap down to the next is huge. And then you're operating at, you know, athletes now, they might be on a contract that's earning them 20-25 grand a year, which is a good job, but that's it, you know, and they're having to give up their lives for that. And particularly with the female athletes, like Steve said, when they're starting to get to a point where they're thinking, actually, time's ticking on and I do want a family, and the pressures there that come with, but starting a family, I've got to move away from a sport that's not paying me back. So a lot of brands have had to start kind of stepping up and going, actually, we recognise that, and building in maternity allowances and pay, because effectively it would be like you've been injured. you know, and you're getting penalised for actually saying, no, do you know what, I actually want to start a family. And look, don't get me wrong, a lot of athletes don't kind of factor that in enough, but also now they've got the option of, it's written into your contract, and actually if I do fall pregnant, I mean, there was people like Denise Lewis got some terrible backlash when she fell pregnant off the back of Sydney. So she just won the Olympic Games, and then she fell pregnant not long after. It was a year or 2 years after, and there was some real senior male people in our sport coming out and making some ridiculous statements about what's she doing. You're like, she's
living a life. Yeah.
But she came back. Jess Ennis is another one, Jess Ennis Hill. And I think more so you see it in endurance, because it naturally, I guess, assists.
Oddly enough, in the 70s and the 80s, the Eastern Europeans who were cheating most of the time.
You're allowed to allegedly.
No, they weren't. They would send their young female athletes, if they were good, they would tell them to go and have children, or make them go and have children quite young. You know,
get 19, it out the
20,
way.
21. No, because it raises testosterone levels.
Right. Your endurance levels.
So
there's lots of science.
Not in sprints and things necessarily, but there's lots of, you know, physiological changes happening in one's body when they get pregnant, when they have a child. So they'd looked at that and said, it's good.
It's a positive thing.
You're going to have a year out, but yeah. Anyway, we've come a long way.
We have come a long way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you've focused your energies on as well is your charitable work. So COCO, tell me about COCO, where that came from.
Yeah, I'll try and make this brief.
I think, you know, people would expect that because of your background, you would have a sporting charity, but you haven't.
Yeah, well, but it sort of came out of a sporting event as such. So look, you get to do loads of charity, you get asked to do loads of charity things, and you know, always have tried to do as much as I can. I must admit, I got to a point where I was like, you know, where's that money going? What's that? You know, and that's fine, but you did what you were asked to do, and I got. It was really by accident. So I'll try and do this in 90 seconds. But after the Bosnian War, in the mid-90s, I got a letter. I remember them. And from a guy who was stationed with one of the UN peacekeeping, he's part of the UN peacekeeping force, and they'd been in a place called Gornji Valkuf, seen lots of bad fighting, it was coming to an end, and they'd seen the two villages that were destroyed, and they were in a real place where it was a mix of you know, they used to be mixed, and then the Muslim part of the town had gone that way, and you know, sort of Serb Croats that way, and it was all. And they were wanting to do something. So he wrote to me and said, look, he grew up watching in South Africa, there's a very famous race called the Comrades Marathon. So Comrades Marathon was set up by British soldiers after the First World War. That's why it's called Comrades. And they got drunk one night, stationed in Pietermaritzburg, and said, I wonder if we could run to Durban. It's 55 miles, so it was a double marathon. And they did it, and then they decided every year to do it to commemorate their friends who died, their colleagues who died. Okay. And so it was one of the few running events that you know, it's not as old as the Boston Marathon or whatever, but predates London Marathon, Great Renault's run by you know, 50, 60 years. So it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And all the way through apartheid, it was the one event that anybody could do. They weren't separated, mainly because you've got to be stupid to run 55 miles.
I was going to say, did they have many volunteers?
Exactly. Well, in the early years, it was just a few hundred people.
Yeah.
And then during the 70s and 80s, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. So he'd watched this as a kid. He was growing up in South Africa. And he says, right, I'm going to do a run here in Bosnia. Will you come and support us? And I went, yeah, sure. So the army flew me out. And these are fighter pilots. And so it was 10 of us. And I was meant to run the first 5 or 6 miles. And I was running along. And there was a guy from South Africa who'd won the Comrades Marathon who'd come as well. So they'd raised money, and I hadn't raised any money or anything. I was just supporting them. And he said, "You're not going to stop, are you?" I went, "Well, yeah, I only want to run 6 or 7 miles." So anyway, I did the whole thing, 55 miles. And I just loved these guys. I thought, I have no right. These aren't runners, proper runners. And they put themselves through. And so anyway, we're all having a beer afterwards. Everyone, 2 went to hospital. You know, it was all one of those things. Army organised it very well. And then I said, so how much money did you raise, you know? And they said, all right, we want to build us 2 schools back in the village, and we've raised £5,000. I went, what? You just run 55 miles and you've raised £5,000. And they said, well, it's been hard to, because back then you couldn't do an online, you know.
No just giving or anything like that, yeah.
And I was like, really? Okay. So then that night, with the South African guy, we all agreed to go to the real event. Because we finished where Torval and Dean had won their gold medal in Sarajevo. It was all bombed out the stadium. That's where we actually finished. And it was a really interesting thing to do in amongst all that, you know, war-torn rubble, if you like. But we were in our own little bubble doing it. Nobody knew what we were doing. And so we decided to go the year later, all the same 10. And so anyway, I think I raised about £50,000 from friends.
So it was like 98,
so I did a 55 mile 2 years in a row. So the real one in South Africa was great. And he and I became good friends. And so the army flew me back, having raised this chunk of money. We built these 2 schools, or helped build these 2 schools in the community. And I thought, I've raised the money, or I've helped raise the money, and I've seen exactly what it's been spent on, and I've met the kids.
Feel the impact.
Yeah. And that's how, so the Comrades Marathon, so where the, you know, COCO is Comrades of Children Overseas. And eventually the Africa thing was what drew us back there, because we started out doing it in South Africa. So that's why it's called COCO.
Yeah, it's focused on East Africa.
Yeah, so after, you know, once we got going, we looked at where are the places where we're not a big charity, we're raising money primarily in the Northeast, which is great for something where, so we started to concentrate in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, on places, particularly pretty rural areas where we could have an impact with you know, the amount of money that we've had. And it's been great. You know, we've raised millions of pounds and have, I hope, done an awful lot of good, and we still are. Still trying to.
It's probably because when Steve and I got together, one of the first things I did for the charity was when sports celebs do millions of golf days, you know, and I remember you coming back and you were like, we need to do this for COCO. Let's have a COCO celebrity golf day. So we literally recruited loads of just went through the phone book, recruited loads of our friends, did it at Matfern. We had more sports celebrities than teams that we'd sold. But I think that then got the interest and the excitement of events.
It's quite hard setting up a charity, you know, because you kind of just go, great, I'll just go and raise some money, you know, and then you go, well, where do we put it and how do we, you know, and then you've got to have a then, you know, you've got to spend it properly, and you know, so. And
we came across Lucy at the time, and then Lucy became the force that.
Yeah, Lucy just finished a master's degree where she'd been out in Durban. And,
so she'd seen. I mean, it's again sliding doors moment. She was doing a master's in Durban and saw a minibus with this sort of COCO acronym and in sort of primary colours drawn on the side of a minibus, which was one of the I think it was one of the orphanages that you'd funded this minibus for. And then it just so happened that her parents went to a fundraiser that we'd done, an Oktoberfest, the German links, at the racecourse. And her parents had gone. And I'd got a school in Middlesbrough, where I'm from, Teesside. We got a load of kids which is not appropriate at all, to draw COCO on a load of shot glasses that we then that we gave away. As they didn't drink, but they drew in the art class all of these. They painted the logo on all of these shot glasses. It just so happened that Luce was back, saw this shot glass in her mum and dad's kitchen, and was like, "Guys, what's this? What's this charity? I've seen this logo." And they were like, "Oh, it's Steve Cram's charity." So she did a bit more digging, and literally knocked down your door and said, "I want to come and work for you." And you went, "We've got no money. I'll work for free."
The thing about any charity, you know, we're a small charity and stuff, but and it's quite hard doing international development, which is what you're doing, because most charities in the UK are to help people on the doorstep or whatever, and it's actually quite hard to persuade people that, oh, you know, there's this little school in
East Africa,
Songea in Tanzania, and you know they need some clean water, or you know we want to buy them a a compostable toilet, or we want to, or it's quite hard to engage people in that. So what we realised, the way to engage people was to do fun things. Whether it's a golf day, whether it's a ball, whether it's do you want to come to Kenya and climb Kilimanjaro, and then we'll take you to, a bit like I got, take you to where that money is being spent, and you can meet the kids, make it real for them, or come on a bike track. So that's kind of what we've done over the years. But it's
and then it was probably that motivation then that we took into the running events, and that again was just by pure chance, living close to Kielder water and having no experience of organising run events and going.
I look back on that now sometimes. That's not fair. You've taken part in lots of events, and seen events, and we, so
you can see what works.
It was not meant to be what it's become. It was they'd finished the new trail on the North Shore, and I'd gone up on my bike one day and was used to riding the trail on the South Shore, and I'm like, hang on a minute, and it wasn't open yet, and I threw my bike over the little barrier that was saying, no entry, so I rode around, I got back.
And we looked at the Garmin, didn't we?
25 miles, sort of thing, So, and that became a little bit, again, it's, whatever you're going to do in life, whether it's your job or your hobby or whatever, if something makes you kind of want to get off your backside and do it, then great. And sometimes, a bit like starting to run when I never thought I was going to be a career. I mean, bless him, he's not be around now, but Mr. Hutchinson, who was my careers teacher at school, or was a careers master, he taught other things, but you had someone, so when you're 15, you had to start to go and talk to them about, what are you going to do, I don't know, because all in my head's just running. And I was doing well with exams and everything, and and over a period of a year, 18 months, he kept saying, Steve, you're going to have to, and I went, okay, and you go in the library and you go, okay, I like geography and maths, okay, all right, civil engineering. And to keep him happy at one point, I said, I want to be a civil engineer. I didn't have no interest at all in being a civil engineer, but it kept him happy and kept me happy. And then at some point then, there started to get a bit of conflict. I was getting asked to go and travel, and I was still at school. And at one point he had me in and he said, look, Steve, he goes, we were all very proud of you and you're doing brilliantly. He said, but you must remember, this cannot be a career for you. You'll never earn any money doing this. You have to get your qualifications and you have to get a job. And he's kind of right. And then a few years later, he'd given up teaching and he was working for the tourist board, Northumberland Tourist Board. And they used to have a little stand at Newcastle Airport, actually. And he was always there. And every time I'd go, hi, Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, not Mr. Harrison. I'd go, hi. And you go, hi. He goes off again. Oh, yeah. I went, yeah. And it just, it was lovely because he was a lovely man. And he was right in what he said. But kind
sometimes you don't want somebody to give you
sometimes
the boundary.
You don't realise that the passion you have for something.
Yeah.
And again, come back to us organising events. It's because I love seeing people run.
Yeah.
I genuinely love. Because when I was a kid, running around the streets of South Tyneside and there was nobody doing it, and there were some estates you didn't want to run through because you got chased and things thrown at you, and it was strange, Whereas now, wherever you go, people are running.
Yeah. And we're fresh off our Kielder Marathon weekend last weekend, and I stand on that finish line and you get every emotion and every story, from real heart-wrenching, there was 15 people running in memory of a 23-year-old girl who ran Kielder Marathon for the first time last year, fell in love with running and had a terrible accident in the lakes and died earlier this year. Her mom pulled all of her friends and family together, and they were crossing that line with these pink t-shirts on with her face on, not a dry eye in the house. Then you get, a guy who'd been saved by the NHS, had a cardiac arrest, was coming back, running the marathon to raise money for the British Heart Foundation, and literally story after story after story. And yes, okay, it was the front end that we were celebrating, a guy that came back after winning the Kielder Marathon back in 2011, came back and won it again. And so there were the elites, but that's why the passion of the daily grind of emails and the pain of pulling together. You sometimes have to remember
why,
why you do it.
I think we're probably a little bit lucky because Great North Run has all those stories, but it's 50,000 people. We've got 4,000 or 5,000 people, And so you kind of get into the stories a little bit more and actually get to meet the people and see the people. And Al's right, you know, we have to remind our crew have to work really hard, and we have 150 volunteers, and that's why they do it. Mm-hmm. They do it because they know, and some of them have been in those positions themselves. So again, it's a passion which has turned into a business for us now, but it's still the passion that's important.
But I think that's a lovely way to end the podcast. You know, keep focused on your passion, and life will give you back.
Yeah. Definitely.
So thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's been great to talk to you. Could have talked all afternoon.
I know.
But, I know you have very, very busy schedules.
You've got two people here who talk a lot.
Yeah.
But thanks very much.
Loved it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed that episode of our podcast, Fear Less Do More. If you did, then please follow or subscribe. If you enjoyed what we talked about in this episode, then you might enjoy this one here, which is also linked in the show notes. Thanks for listening.